Hey Internet, I'm Simon Squibb, your host at the Good Luck Club podcast. Our mission is to help anybody out there that's thinking of starting a business do just that. Equally, if you've started a business and are struggling, maybe you need a little bit of inspiration and knowledge. And we hope by interviewing some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs and change makers that you'll get the knowledge you need to become the person you want and turn your business into that dream company. I personally have started 17 companies from scratch and have invested in over 65 startups. When I sat down and analysed how I did it, I discovered a secret. It was all luck. I'm here to tell you, in my opinion, without luck, it ain't gonna work. Each week, I will discuss with my guests this theory and see if luck is a skill as I feel it is. I hope you enjoy our episode this week. Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast, where we tell real life stories from entrepreneurs that have been there and done that. Today's guest on my podcast show is Hernán Zanghellini. I hope I got his surname right. He is one fascinating individual, and I think you're going to enjoy today's podcast. Hernán, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Maybe you could start off the podcast by just telling us a little bit about yourself.
I'm an architect originally from Chile, now living in Hong Kong, and stopped by on the way here many years ago in Sydney, then Brunei, and ended up designing restaurants in Hong Kong, where eventually developed into also opening restaurants with partners that I met along the way. That's in short. If you want to go deeper, I used to be very shy, and that was the main drive to leave Chile and try something on my own. You know, I grew up in a bit of a cocoon, and going to Australia was kind of to break away and see if I could survive on my own. The original idea was minimum 2 years, maximum 5, and then go back. And that was, 35 years ago, I think. And then, you meet people along the way and you just go with the flow. And it's been an amazing journey, and it's been fantastic to get rid of all those fears. I was very shy and very fearful of everything. And then when you start with nothing and you keep falling and start with nothing again, you get used to it and you lose the fear. And it's the biggest gift in my life.
Are you still shy?
For certain things, everyone will tell you I'm not, but occasionally I blush. But before I couldn't do anything without blushing. We had a family lunch on Sundays, and they're all having a hot, heated up discussion, and occasionally I forget that I'm shy, and I will have an opinion, and everyone will just go quiet and say, "Oh, he can talk," and that would be it. My hands start sweating. I would go red. Now I can take all of that quite easily. I'm still hopeless to go into a shop, ask for something, and not come out with some crap that I don't need. But apart from that, I'm okay.
I think it's fascinating talking to someone like yourself. I mean, looking at your CV, you've been self-employed for many years, and I guess sometimes the concept of being an entrepreneur and being shy aren't two things that normally go together. People perceive entrepreneurship as very outgoing, I guess, kind of not shy folks. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey and maybe what success means to you, and how you've managed to overcome, I guess, the stereotype of an entrepreneur.
Actually, I was very fearful of being an entrepreneur. In fact, I was very fearful of everything. I think I became an architect. I always knew I was going to be an architect. I don't know, maybe my mother brainwashed me when I was very young. But also it was like I was not particularly good at anything. And I thought, okay, drawing a house cannot be that hard. So I ended up going into it. And I remember studying architecture and the constant fear 5 years ahead of how am I going to survive on this profession? How am I going to get my first job? How's it going to happen? I'm not going to go and knock a door and ask for work. But then along the way, you just get little drafting jobs or extra jobs from teachers, and then through the teacher you meet somebody else, and then some of my employers basically, or not, like the teachers that would work with me on a part-time basis, they would not like to do a job because it was too small, so they would just say, Hernán, you can do that, it's yours. And then you build a relationship with these people, and you start getting your little jobs on your own. So with a group of friends, we rented a garage in an architect's office, and we started from there. That was on my second year of university. Again, I came out of university, and it was a recession. So there was no hope I was going to get a proper job. So I stayed in university and did some extra courses while on the half day, setting up with my 5 friends, and we set up an office, and you do the odd job. Started doing a bit of construction. In Chile, they wouldn't pay you in those days for designing, especially since you just came out. But they would, give you can you do a kitchen for, somebody, a kitchen extension, a toilet extension, an extension to the house. And all of a sudden you get into that rhythm of things, and you start realizing that is one connection with the next one. It's a matter of just doing a good service and a good job, and then they will recommend you to somebody else. I was, this kind of getting into a TV or video conference, or knocking a door and asking for work, it was never going to happen. And one of the best things that has happened in my life is when I moved on to designing restaurants, because a lot of the marketing is done by the place itself. If you're doing residential, it's probably a bit more difficult because you need people to promote you, your client to promote you, and then how many guests are you going to get in a house in a day? I design a restaurant, I get 100 customers that are coming in there, and all I need is 1 or 2 to like it, apart from somebody next door that feels like, why is that restaurant working? I don't mind, and they approach you. So it becomes easy once you start doing it. But I was incredibly fearful of how do you get these clients? How do you knock at the door? How do you negotiate a fee? What was the right fee? And maybe for 15 years they were too low. But eventually, you start getting more work, and it's a matter of choosing between 2. You pick the one that pays a little bit better, or it's got a better exposure on the site, and I like what I do, so I think that makes a difference. Designing restaurants gives you an amazing satisfaction, so you don't need to just look at the bottom line. Even in a lot of jobs, a lot of them that ended up being non-profitable, you still get a lot of satisfaction. You would do it again. I would do it again. Some of them that you think, what a horrible experience. And if you say, would you do it again? I said, well, I wouldn't do that twice, but even if I knew I was going to go through that experience, I'll do it again, because you learn from it. And again, like I said, designing restaurants, it gives an amazing satisfaction. You can have, when you start designing a restaurant, is like it's a honeymoon period, the first 2 weeks. And then it goes through a little bit of a boring period. And then 2 weeks before opening, you start having all the tension of breaking up period. The client is feeling a little bit insecure. They spend all of this money. They've been bragging on how it's going to look. And they go to site, and it doesn't look like it's going to be done on time. It doesn't look sexy enough. And they start panicking. So then they start pointing fingers. There's no time to change it. There's no budget to change it. And then, 2 days before, they're still panicking because there's all the little details that are missing. And a restaurant has to be designed to have people in it. So even if it's perfectly fine and finished, it's not alive till you have people inside. And the minute you get the people inside, they come to life. And then it doesn't matter. The client forgets about all the pain. It's like having a baby. And the satisfaction you get, you forget about all the pain. And if you didn't make any money, it doesn't really matter. It's you're really ready for the next. So the process to become an entrepreneur was because there was no other opportunities out there really. And then
sorry to interrupt you. I mean, that's an interesting point. I think for today's time, I think a lot of people will feel the same way right now, that they can't get a job, or there's a recession, of course, not only brewing but probably happening right now. I guess depending on how you technically call a recession. But so you must be able to relate to that. Back then for you, this time right now for people. But it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in a way that was good for you, right? It gave you a chance to go and create your own business that you may not have done if you were given a job and able to hide away in the back office for someone else.
Honestly, by now, I'm a believer that most of the bad things that happen to you end up with a better result than if it had been just all good. Every time I moved to Australia, and then after a year and a half or 2 years, it was a recession in Australia, probably the last one they had. So I started feeling like wherever I went, I was
a recession.
Yeah, right. I'm really strong at it. Wherever I go, I have to start from scratch again. When I got to Australia, the first 3 months, in Chile, I didn't even need a portfolio. If I was going to go to somebody, it was like a friend of somebody in the family, whatever it is. And you just sort of, somebody knows somebody that you did know. And so I never had to show anything that I've done, and I had done nothing anyhow. And then I went to Australia, and it was like, go to interviews and you have to have a portfolio. I have to do one, I have to make one. I don't have one. So for the first 3 months, I work as a cleaner. And after 3 months, I got a job as an architect in an office. And I was earning less as a cleaner. So it was quite frustrating. And people said, oh, yes, but, in a year from now, you will be earning a lot more than you were earning as a cleaner. Well, a year from there, I had a client in one of these big offices that used to be a cleaner. He still had a cleaning company, and he was building an 80 million hotel in Australia. So it doesn't quite work that. You could still make it in a complete different area to where you were. And then after 2 years working on the large companies, I got bored and ended up opening a small company with one of the guys from the office, a local guy. And after a year and a half, it didn't work. So we moved back into a big company. Then it was another recession. They ended up applying for jobs through the paper and ended up with a job in Brunei. As a story told short, there's a lot of things that happen in between. But I always, even when I was working in the large company, my boss ended up giving me their friends' clients to do house extensions. And so I always had a little job on the side. And it was always much more fun than these big jobs that I was doing in the office. The office was great, but those jobs take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. You never see them finished. You work in your own little house extension, and it takes 6 months, 9 months, and you see them being completed and people enjoying them. And you go there for a barbecue and getting pissed with the owner. It's a very different experience, a lot more gratifying. And again, because of the recession, the second recession in Australia, I ended up in applying for a job and ended up in Brunei. And from Brunei, I used to come to Hong Kong every 3 months. I met a neighbor in Sydney that we used to see each other through the kitchen window. And we ended up meeting on the street. And then this guy one day opened a hi-fi shop that I designed. He was very entrepreneurial. I mean, the most entrepreneurial person I've ever met. The worst manager I've ever met, but a really, really good entrepreneur. And he would come up with the most wildest ideas. And one day he was on the left, and the next day he was on the right with another complete different idea. And he would come and beg me very often for, Hernán, can you help him with a little sketch and let's put a business plan? And then he would try to go and find investors. Well, eventually, he ended up opening a hi-fi shop in Sydney, and he used to come through Hong Kong to buy satellite dishes in Taiwan. And he met a chef in a minibus, and he decided to open a Thai restaurant in Hong Kong, Wyndham Street Thai. And so he asked me, Hernán, can you design a restaurant? I said, yeah, sure, I can design a restaurant. My father had restaurants back in Chile, so it was and it was something that I never thought, dreamt, or planned to be ever involved again in my life. But I ended up, sort of designing the restaurant for him, and it was just a rush of nostalgia. And I grew up in the restaurant. It was 50 meters from my school, so every day I finished the school, I would go there and wait for my father to pick me up and go home. So I used to spend 3-4 hours a day in that restaurant, just playing with my thumbs, going up and down and helping, squeezing lemons for a pisco sour. And it was just an amazing experience to design a restaurant and connect with all these 10 years of memories that you had.
Amazing.
Yep.
No, amazing. I mean, Wyndham Street Thai is still there, right, in Hong Kong?
No, it lasted like probably 12, 15 years, which is a lot for Hong Kong. But
a very long time. For any of my listeners in the US or the UK, I mean, a restaurant in Hong Kong to turn around in 4 years is normal. I mean, if you get through 4 years, you're doing well. I mean, the rents are high, the leases are not long. So 15 years. How long ago were we talking when you did? This is the first restaurant you did in Hong Kong, Wyndham Thai, right?
It was 1983. I was not living.
Okay.
Not living here. I was actually just moved to Brunei when we finished that one, and then after that, I would come here every 3 months, to measure our place up, and then take it back with me. And I was working in Brunei, but after hours, I was designing this restaurant for my friend client, and so after that, we opened a Spanish restaurant. I would come here to meet the contractor, and then I would come 3 months later, a week before opening, and then go back to Brunei. And then we open a gay bar. We open. It was just one thing after the other one. Maybe every 6 months we would open a new place, or he would open a new place, and he would pay me with the trip and books. And for me, all I wanted was to have some real work. The work I was doing in Brunei was quite unreal. It was never going to happen again in my life. So I always feared that I was going to be out of touch if I stay there for too long without doing things that had deadlines and budgets and return on investment things. So and then at one point he calls and he said, "I got 2 restaurants for you to do." I said, "I can't. I can only do 1 restaurant at the time." And I've got a full-time job. And my daughter was at the time in Chile, and because there was no high school in Brunei for international high school. So he said, come to Hong Kong, and, we have a fee that can be divided over a year. And so 1996, we packed and came to Hong Kong. And then 1997, 98, the Asian crisis got us. So it was like, oh, here we go again, and that was as tough as now. We didn't have enough connections. My client basically packed his bags and left. So we luckily we had done 5 restaurants by them, and they were all incredibly popular. So we had at least something to show for. But it was tough. I had to close the office. We was basically part of his warehouse, and I had 3 people working with me, and they all went to back to their own countries. But again, what happened is a lot of bigger offices with bigger overheads that have been creaming it here for years, they just wrapped their bags and went back home. So it was not much competition in terms of designers left. And I went to work from home for about, 6-7 months. We had some tough little times, Christmas 98, we had no money for presents. My wife had been rewrapping the old toys that they had, cleaning them up and put them aside so the kids forget that they had them. And but again, we lived off. We borrow money from friends that we had only met for a year. It was a tough year, but it forces you to go out and do things that you feel uncomfortable with. And again, managers that I met in restaurants where I worked before would call us and say, Hernán, can you do an extension here? Can you change? Can you help us with that? And I would go there, and eventually, we started doing a couple of jobs here and there. And the few jobs that we did, unlike now, if you are here in Hong Kong, well, now it's probably slightly different, but let's say 6 months ago, you had a new restaurant open in Hong Kong every 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
So 3 hours.
You have such a short time to expose yourself, and then is another one, and is another one, and is another one. On those years, 1997, 98, it was nothing. It was a restaurant, Farangelos, that opened up, and it was, the rage. They were paying $6.50 a square foot rent. It
was bad back then to do that, of course, but.
And it was cheap Italian and with a big piece of bread, that it was free. So it accused, and it was one of the very few successful places that opened on the air, and they got a hell of a lot of coverage, magazine coverage and marketing for free, because the magazines, again, they didn't have much information, so they are looking for something to publish. We design, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 restaurants a year, and it was the same. I would get calls from, InDesign magazine and Hinge magazine and Perspective magazine. I tell you, in those 2-3 years, I got published more than for the other 500 restaurants I've done after that. Mm-hmm. So it was. If I had done it now, it would probably not now again. But if I had done it at a peak time, it would have been a lot harder. You don't get the exposure. You don't get the people looking for something new, because it's something new every weekend.
I really want the listeners to pick up on quite a few bits and pieces that you're talking about here that I think are very relevant to the entrepreneur journey. I think, first of all, the humble beginnings piece, I think, can make you grateful over time. Sometimes if you get it too easy, too quickly, you can lose that gratefulness. And it sounds to me, the way you're describing, some of your early jobs weren't very glamorous, but you appreciated the work and you enjoyed the work, and that led you to get more work. And I think a lot of people sometimes want it all straight away. There's a kind of an instant gratification, whereas what you're talking about, I think, is a very important journey for an entrepreneur. You step by step get to do what you want. And then, so you get in that one restaurant and that's what you want. And then there's suddenly 2 restaurants that someone wants you to do. And that's when it escalates into come to Hong Kong, right? So it's a step-by-step process. So, I have to say, actually, just for the record as well, our paths might have crossed, because I arrived in 1997 in Hong Kong. So I arrived just before the handover. And I remember, similar to what you're saying, and a lot of people kind of shut shop and left, not just because of the financial crisis, but also because they thought when China were rolled in, it would become this communist state, and you wouldn't want to have a business there anymore. So a lot of people left, and to your point exactly, that created a vacuum, an opportunity for people like you, and for me. I started a business at that time too. And it created an opportunity. And I think that's part of what I want people to pick up on for today. That although while we're in the middle of this difficult time with coronavirus, in it all is in fact an opportunity for you to reinvent yourself, or figure out what you really want, or go out there and build something that people need that are going to help them right now, right? So that's kind of what you've gone through by keep walking into these recessions in a way, right?
Well, and every time now, and that's something I guess you just learn with age and experience. If I trip, it's like, okay, what's going to come out of this? It's not necessarily bad. The fact that it forces you to do something out of your comfort zone, you become more grateful that you managed to overcome that. Like I said before, I was just so painfully shy. And not just shy, I was afraid of doing anything, taking a risk, or expose myself, embarrass myself. Now, it's occasionally I might blush, but anything that goes wrong, it's just one day of being upset, and then the next day is like, okay, what are we going to do about it? And,
do you think the shyness actually has ended up being a superpower for you in a way? Has it? How? I mean, I'm also interested in a second point. It's like, how did it manifest itself? Sorry, listeners, I have my dogs. I'm podcast recording from home, so sometimes my dogs do bark. Pretty annoying. Maybe Connor, you can try and edit that out. But yeah. So sorry. How did it play out for you? I mean, family-wise, I'm intrigued. Like, if you had a young daughter, so it sounds like you were taking a lot of risks. How did that play out?
I have an amazing wife because she went along with all the shit that I kept doing. And by the time we got to Hong Kong, it was 3 kids. I was 30 years old, 32, and. So yes, it was a high risk. And then 98 came, we had the recession. And honestly, the reason we didn't leave is I couldn't afford the ticket, and the only way to afford the ticket would have been to call my mother and say, Mom, send me money for the ticket. And that was not going to happen. And again, my wife, by this time, I'm used to work on my own. I want, not on my own, but for myself. So I don't want to work for a big company. I don't want to work in these structures, corporate structures anymore. And she just went along all the time. She put with so much crap, and never maybe a long face every now and again, but never a disapproval. It was like, you're not gonna like it. Just keep doing it. Do what you do.
I often tell people the most important partnership you can ever establish in life is your partnership. Yeah. You never have a contract for that, and you should kind of shake hands or kiss and make a deal, and and that's the best and most important deal you can ever make, and it can really affect your career dramatically too. Because if you'd had pressure from your wife, we've got 3 kids, what are you doing going to Hong Kong? Let's just build a business here or get a job, then your life would be very different today, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. I didn't tell my wife when I was applying for the job in Brunei. I thought, okay, I'll apply first, and then we'll see how it goes. And then I got home one night, and she's opens the door, and she's got a fax and the atlas, and say, "Where is Brunei?"
That's so funny.
Shit, I should have talked about this before. But she was like, "Okay, we're going to Brunei."
Yeah, well, I mean, that's also an element of the trust that you have. I have a similar thing where I say to my wife, suddenly, I've sold my company. And she's like, oh, okay, right. What are we doing next? So if you got the right partner, they'll go with the flow. Sometimes telling them maybe you're going to get a job in Brunei will make them worry more than we've got a job in Brunei. Let's go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So and honestly, I had very good friends, my best friends, and I know that the wife would, go and talk to my wife and say, why don't you tell him to stop doing that? Because I couldn't have holidays. When you work for yourself and it's a small company, if you take holidays, you have no pay. You're working for yourself. So it's not just the cost of the holidays, the fact that you have no income.
And plus the fact that client may end up having to use someone else and building a relationship with someone else, right? So it's not that they'll wait for you always. I mean, you now have a very, very good reputation. Of course, people would wait for you, but back in the early days, that's not always the case, right? People are like, I'm opening a restaurant, I've got rent to pay, so we need to get this done. So if you're away on holiday, cost of the holiday, cost of no income, and maybe the loss of a client.
So my wife would go away on holidays with the kids back home and to Chile, and I would stay and work. It's it was no Sundays, no Saturdays. It's only about, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago that my wife said, no more Sundays and no more Sundays.
What was the name of the Spanish restaurant? Just for my Hong Kong listeners, what was the name of the Spanish restaurant that you did?
Bodega.
La Bodega.
It's across from the...
These are all very famous names. For anyone that's lived in Hong Kong, these are like institutional restaurants, the original popular restaurants.
At the time, I did the Wyndham Street Thai, then I did La Bodega, then I did a little corner, the noodle shop, just in Wyndham Street with Glen Ely. And then in Glen Ely up the road, I did the gay bar called Zip. Then I worked in 1998 when the crisis started. I worked with the FCC, the Foreign Correspondent Club. So I did the jazz bar and the dining hall and the main bar. and they were going broke almost at the time. So again, we did it for next to nothing. And
when you think about the FCC, you don't think broke. They're in a beautiful building, well funded by. I mean, yeah. So it's amazing that, you know, when you say FCC, my first question is, was this where you were starting to get paid proper money? But then somehow
they were suffering and struggling, and then we did the Jasper, and the Jasper picked up, and then we did the rooftop, the main dining area, and the whole thing. I mean, it's not because of us, but you know, the economy picked up at the same time. It's a whole, you know, lot of things that happen at the same time, and it picked up, and it was again an amazing experience. And they're all journalists, they're all lawyers, so you meet other people. I never made good use of all the connections in terms of marketing. I tend to shy away and run back to the office. But at the time, I used the FCC a lot because I didn't have an office anymore. I lived in Discovery Bay. I used to take the ferry twice a week just for meetings. And I used the FCC for the meetings. That was a trade-off. You know, the fee was low, but I could use the FCC. And then we rented a little place in Lockhart Road that cost nothing, but we didn't even have air conditioning. But it was February, so it was okay. It was cold, but by May it was getting very hot, and we still have no air conditioning. But we had no money to buy an air conditioning, and it was a 6 by 7 square meter, sort of hole in an old building, and we could afford a fan, so we bought a fan that we used to put by the door to suck the cold air from the offices next door to us, and eventually we managed to get an aircon, and again we got, you know, one job led to the next one. One day we had a client that just knocked the door. New client, we'd never met him before. They just knocked the door literally and came in with a group of maybe 6 of his associates, and they came to interview us for a job. And I was like, okay. So I had to let everyone in the office go out so I could use their chairs. And we all sat. And we started talking about restaurants. He owned a couple of restaurants at the time. I don't know, maybe 12 restaurants. And he had a site where he needed to do 4 restaurants. And he used to design them himself. He was not a designer, but he was a very good entrepreneur, and actually had a very good eye for the layout and getting the restaurants right. So he came up, he had a site in Nutford Terrace, and he said, look, normally I would do them myself, but I cannot do 4 at the same time. So came to us, and we did a Cuban restaurant, a Thai, Vietnamese, and Spanish restaurant, and a seafood restaurant, and Russian restaurant, balalaika. You know, sort of we got all this stuff from Siberia to decorate the restaurant. And we opened these places, and again, they were a boom. He was a very good operator, you know. So I've been very lucky too that I ended up meeting the right clients. They know what they're doing, so it's much easier to have something that's successful, and you take part of the credit.
Well, you could argue that they found you. You know, those good clients knew that you were good at what you do. Now, I just want to give a bit of context actually to this for a moment, because I listened to your story. And if any listeners out there listening to your story, you sound very humble, and you've come from this, you know, interesting line from Chile to Brunei to then coming to Hong Kong, and you know, you mentioned you were a cleaner there. But let me just tell you what my experience was of you and your brand. Okay, so I was in Hong Kong in 1997. I opened up an agency called Fluid. We were doing brands for restaurants. Okay, and the first time I ever heard your name, I was working for a new restaurant bar, and they asked us to do their brand, and I said to them, "Who's designing what you're doing?" And they said they wanted you but couldn't afford you. And so you know, I think, so my impression when I first heard your name, this is maybe 2008. You know, is that you were, you know, the high end of the market. And if anyone's been listening to this podcast up until this point, that, you know, you sound like, you know, you were just kind of doing whatever came your way, but something changed along the way, and I'd love to hear what happened. You mentioned earlier in the podcast that you became an owner in restaurants, and so what happened?
there's two things. First, 2000, we had a break. We had a site in Pacific Place. There used to be a restaurant there called Tigers, belonged to Maxime's, and they came to us. Maxime's came to us and said, we need a new modern Thai restaurant. And they had seen Wyndham Thai, so they wanted something on those lines. So we designed a restaurant there called Wyndham Thai Basil in Pacific Place.
Know it very well. Anyone that's not been to Hong Kong, that's listening to all this now, you need to write these restaurants down. Thai Basil. Still there, isn't it?
It changed. We actually, they moved site and we didn't design the next one. But in the same site, we just actually opened 3 weeks ago for them Peking Garden in the same site that the original Thai Basil was. But in year 2000, we designed Thai Basil and it got into Wallpaper magazine, top 100 restaurants in the world in Condé Nast. We just got everywhere. And again, our fee at the time was, I would have done it for freaking free. It was Pacific Place. But in fact, we did the Peak Cafe a little bit before that. And
that's another smash hit.
And that was a very, very tough client. I love him, but he's really tight, And we negotiated that for weeks, and it was really a low fee. And once we settled, he said, I would have paid you more. And I told him, well, I would have done it for free. It was such a
It reminds me of the Pretty Woman scene, the movie Pretty Woman, when there's like, I would have paid you double. She said, I would have taken half, You both think you've negotiated a good deal. By the way, I know the operator you're talking about. We don't have to mention his name, but he's a fantastic individual, and I know exactly the profile you mean. That between you, it's a fantastic juggle to get a deal done. But so that was your break, I guess. You once you've got a top 100 restaurant, that's it, wasn't it? You're kind of made in your business.
Well, we had a trajectory, but now we had something in a Swire property, and it was hot, and it was hot for years. And then things started to pick up. The economy started to pick up in parallel at the same time. So we got lucky, and we could start getting into a more professional level, and start charging. And then I had we hired an office administrator secretary that negotiated the fees for me, and she's local, so it made a big difference.
See, this is a tip I want people to pick up on, and there's so many reasons I wanted to interview her, and I think partly because I think people out there that think they're not entrepreneurs, you probably are, and what you've just mentioned there is an example. If you're shy or you have a strength in one area but a weakness in another, you can hire the weakness you have. So like you're saying there, you got someone in who could speak the language and that could negotiate price while you did what you loved, which was create the environments and do the back end, I guess, work itself. So you overcome your weakness and double down on your strength, right?
Absolutely. The fees I would still negotiate before she came. But all the chasing, all the money, all the administration, my wife would do it, and she hated it too, but someone has to do it. And I was much worse than her at doing it. So, but it was hard. Our office was small. We were 4 people, and it was like, how can I pay someone full time to just negotiate fees and do the paperwork? I believed in whoever is here has to be hands-on and be drawing it and going to site and be part of it. But it got tiring, and then we tried, and we have met her before. We knew her strength, and I think our fees went up, probably 40-50% overnight.
Well, I mean, my wife's a creative, so I can talk to this a little bit, that she never values what she's doing in the sense that she just wants to do the work. You've said it a few times in this podcast, you would have done it for free. And I think for creatives, when they're loving what they do, my wife is the same. She would do it all day long for free. And because she loves doing it, and building value in or doing price discovery is almost like a pain, because it's a friction point between you and doing the work.
Yep.
And so it's fascinating, I think, as a creative entrepreneur is kind of how I see you. But I have a lot of respect for you. I mean, we've never spoken before, but your brand and your name and your history, as someone that owned a design company, you were definitely one of the people in Hong Kong that had an organization that people respected. And I loved the story that it wasn't a typical profile of an entrepreneur. You weren't a salesperson like me. I was a salesperson, but you were humble. But I'm interested in just stepping back for a second, because I want to get to the end of your Hong Kong story and tell a little bit about how you got into the ownership of restaurants. But just before we do that, I just want to take a step back. I wonder, why are you shy? Do you think what were your parents like? How did that manifest itself?
My father was very shy. I was the first grandson, the first son, the first. So I was the good guy. I was good. I always did well. And it was very frustrating. And because I know what I'm thinking, I wasn't so good, but you're constantly putting up with this show. And then people would, I realized I had psychologists when I was 11, the first time I went to it. And then therapy group when I was 19, and again when I was 22. And they got better, and I got better, but it was always a heavy weight on my back. But when I left and I went to Australia, I realized that half of it is a sticker. I grew up in Chile, and they will all say, "Oh, he's so nice, he's so good, he's a bit shy." And I would go to a party and I was a DJ at university and at school. Part of it was because I didn't need to dance. I could just go in the corner and put the music. So you are cool, but you don't need to participate. You don't need to talk to anyone.
The DJs mostly are always the coolest people. You always wanted to know the DJ, so that's quite a good place to be.
So it was pretty good, but I didn't need to be part of that. I was sorry, I'm busy, I'm back to the thing, and that may be extra money anyhow. So it was the side. It was all good. The DJ thing was fantastic, and it was a great cover to the shyness. So you're participating, but you're not in there. And in those days, the DJs didn't need to talk. Now they talk, which is I wouldn't have never been able to do it now. And
but do you think it wasn't your natural state? Actually, this is something that had got imprinted on you from a young age, and you became what people said you were. Is that what you're saying?
I thought I was born like that. I thought I'm shy, I'm screwed. That's it. But when I left Australia, and after a month or 2 months in Australia, people started having a different attitude towards me. The fact that I didn't talk, they put that on. Oh, he's from Chile, he doesn't speak English. But he's from Chile, they are party animals, they are wild. And all of a sudden, it's like someone is giving you permission to be a party animal and wild. I'm from Chile, I'm South American, I can get away with freaking anything now. And the sticker changed. So I did nothing. And it was like, be careful with it from South America. So this is great. It's like all of a sudden, your sheepskin is a wolf skin. And you're still the same person, but they put a different sticker, and now I can reinvent myself. In Chile, if I spoke on the Sunday table in my family house, it was like everyone quiet, and they're like, "Wow, he's got an opinion," and that would be enough for me to go blank, get sweaty hands.
I actually think this is a good point around. This is why I sometimes say to people, you should leave your village and go and experience the world, because who you are in your village growing up and who you actually are might be two different things. So if you go, even for me, I went to Hong Kong and I just kind of woke up a bit. You can reassess who you are and what your image is and what you want to be, and that's the amazing thing about shedding that skin, I guess, right?
That was, if you have to say what's the best or the one thing in your life, that just get out of your place. Go to somewhere where nobody knows you. It's an amazing. You
get out of your comfort zone initially, but then you can actually find out who you really are, I guess, right? So I'm interested in this whole, this whole concept. So your parents, what did they do? What were their jobs?
I was a housewife and very social, very intelligent, difficult to. Hopefully, she's not going to watch this thing.
She definitely will, so be nice.
Along with, but my father studied architecture, but he got married early, and I think because of me. And then he was a small property developer. Both my grandparents are engineers, and both of them had a small property development company. Then I like talking about building 3 houses and selling them, building maybe a 1 6-story apartment building and selling it. So one was more successful than the other one, but both of my grandparents were constantly doing their own thing. Engineers, but they were doing a bit of property development. So my father got involved eventually in there, and then opened a restaurant with 5 friends. And he lived very simply, so he could happily live with next to nothing. And
so he was also in the restaurant business in the end. He was also in the restaurant business.
By chance, he just invested in a restaurant, and the restaurant ended up being probably the main business they had. So with 4 other friends.
Is this what made you fall in love with the business, you think? How old were you when they got their restaurant?
No. Like I said before, I grew up a block away from that restaurant. And so I used to go there every day for lunch, go back to school, come back in the afternoon, do my homework in the admin office, finish my homework, go downstairs, help in the bar preparing cocktails, and waiting for him to pick me up. But I grew up with that family. It was really a family. It was 60 employees that had been there forever. And I was like a pet for them, and but it was fantastic. And again, when you are shy, being in a restaurant, you kind of watch everyone else doing the thing, but you don't need to participate. So it was fascinating to see all these people doing the most incredibly wild and silly things, especially when they get pissed, and you're just watching from their distance, but there.
How old are you at this time? How old are you? I'm sure it's over a period of time, but how old were you when this was all playing out?
I was 14, and I was 14 till I was 24. I used to go there all the time. After school, I went to university, and after university, I used to stop by the restaurant every day on my way back home, and just for half an hour to say hi to the staff, get a drink or a bag of French fries, and keep going home, and but I never thought of owning, running, designing. It was something that was there. But I participated in meetings when they were doing extensions in the restaurant and stuff, and they would get the architects coming in, and the 5 partners are there, and they had a very clear idea of what they want to do. And then they hired these designers that were very articulate, and they would turn them around in an hour and a half and convince them to design this thing that you look at and say, it makes no freaking sense. But they would design it and build it. And then a month and a half later, they were all pissed off because they had agreed to that, and they were starting to modify it and change it to what made sense. And everyone ended up unhappy, because it ended up in a compromised design. The designer was frustrated and really pissed off because now it looked like shit. And, so when I had this client that can you design a restaurant? And I said, to you that all this flood of memories came back. I remember this meeting. So I put waiter stations, and I allowed for circulation, and allowed for all these things that you don't want to as a designer. You just want them pretty, but you're not thinking about the functionality enough, you mean? So in other words, people design it so it looks pretty, and then when it comes to actual function of the restaurant, they're not thinking of where the waiters are going to stand or where the glasses are going to go, that type of thing, right? And normally when you start putting all of this, they end up making your restaurant look a little bit uglier or not as pretty as you wanted, and the circulation, the line, the alignment, all of that is gone. But I knew that if I didn't do it, the client was going to end up doing it by himself, because eventually it's going to come to life and you're not going to be able to control it. So I compromised, and I found the best way to make it work from day one. And like you were asking before, has been shy influence your? I think it has. It did a lot, especially at the beginning, because I was very considerate with potentially shy clients. I remember just thinking going to a restaurant and being fully exposed the minute you open the door. It bothered me, so I wouldn't go in. If it looked too expensive, I would think twice, because am I carrying enough money to go in there? So
allowed you to have empathy for people that might have those feelings, right?
Absolutely, and I know that it was very frustrating. So you are designing them for a little corner where shy people can enjoy it without being exposed, an entry where you don't come in and you're like flashing in front of everyone from day one, and.
So I think about the restaurants you've done that you mentioned, the history ones like Thai Basil, Wyndham Street Thai. These had little cubbyhole feelings to them. It could be private. So there's a theme running through there, related back to your superpower, which is interesting, isn't it? I guess also, I mean, listening to you, I also feel like you leveraged your superpower by building the process out for clients so that there wouldn't be any friction between you and the client. So in theory, less meetings, less awkward moments.
There are awkward moments. There are minutes in which your first reaction is no, and then it's like, okay, put yourself in the other position. I'm in the service industry. Yes, I love design and I love them to look good, but I'm in the service industry and he's looking for a service. Now, if I give him something really pretty that he cannot feel comfortable with, it won't work. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how many awards I get and how many times it comes in a magazine, it's going to close in 6 months. And I'm going to be frustrated. I much rather do something that I'm not too proud of from an aesthetic point of view. I might not put it on my portfolio. I've got 600 places that I've done. I don't need to put them all there.
600 designs you've done. That's unbelievable.
Probably a few more, but the ones that give you satisfaction are the ones that have a queue outside, the ones that you walk in and you see people enjoying themselves. That's our job. It's not a pretty thing for a magazine. That's
now I know why you became such an icon and so expensive, because you cared about the customer over your own glory, which so many people forget to do.
The thing is, there is glory in the fact that they work.
Yes, you're taking the right glory, but so many people overlook it. So many people want the awards and the prestige. And to your point, which I think is fantastic, for any entrepreneurs listening out there, I want people to pick up on this insight, which is, if you want a great business, you've got to be unselfish in a way. You've got to care about your staff, of course. You've got to care about the people you're working for above and beyond your own personal short-term image.
No, I tend to disagree. I think I'm very selfish on that regard. I think
fair.
The thing is the satisfaction at the end of the day, because I've done very pretty places that didn't work, and the feeling when you walk past them, it's like you have a dog. I used to have dogs when I was very young, and in general they were quite aggressive. In Chile, dogs are aggressive, and they used to fight all the time. And occasionally my dog got old and he got bitten by a dog, sort of 2 blocks from home. And as soon as we were approaching the house of this dog where he got bitten, he would just go across the road and go on the other side. And when you do a restaurant that doesn't work, you get that feeling, you just don't want to go past. You see the managers looking at you with long eyes, kind of like, what are we going to do? The last thing you want is that, somebody invested their life savings in it. They have 60 or 20 or 30 people working inside that. Their life depends on that. You want it full. And it's selfish. You just want it full because it satisfies you. Now, I won't put it on the magazine and I won't put it on the next award-winning competition because I'm not going to embarrass myself on it, but I like to see them full.
Yeah, it's an interesting... I get why you push back on my point. I still think there's an element of selfishness, lack of selfishness there. I still what you're really talking about, I think, is a learning from doing it the wrong way. And no one wants the feeling that you've hurt another business, but there are some people that will say, well, that's the way it goes. Some businesses work, some businesses don't. It feels to me like you take it personally.
I do, very much.
Which I think is a fantastic trait of an entrepreneur, because too many people just skirt over it. I think about people in the financial crisis, for example, that probably made a lot of money from selling people mortgages that were no good for them. They're quite, that's selfish to me. I don't think what you're talking about is selfish. I think what you're talking about, there is, of course, as a human race, no one wants to feel pain, so that bit can be selfish. But I think overarching, you want those businesses to succeed. That's the most important thing. That's success to you, whether it looks pretty or not. It's just a fascinating area. I think your whole way of explaining things is fascinating. I hope the audience are picking up on it. I guess I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier, you said I had a bit of luck, and when you got the Pacific Place project, and for anyone that's know Hong Kong, Pacific Place is a very prestigious location to be given a project. So you had a bit of luck. Now, can we unpack that a little bit? First of all, how do you perceive luck in business? Have you had a lucky moment, or bad luck, or good luck moment, or bad luck moment? You're saying that's good luck, but is it? How does it manifest itself? What do you think about luck?
Like I said to you, I don't go out selling myself. I don't socialize. So, the fact that you just get somebody calling you, or the fact that out of the blue, when I first came to Hong Kong, I remember looking at the Peak Cafe or the Landmark or these icons of restaurants that are out there. And I used to think, how do they get that? How can they be so lucky? And some of the designs were lousy, and you think, why can't I get that? And then, within 20 years, I've got almost all of them. I got the Cafe Landmark, I got the FCC, I got the Peak Lookout. And it's like, really, how lucky can you get? And yes, of course, is a connection that you kind of make along the way. The reason we got the job in Pacific Place is because they wanted to do a modern tie, and they look around, and the best modern tie at the time had been Wyndham Street Tie, and a guy that worked there before basically had my number. So when they were talking about that, the guy said, I know the designer. So, you just do a good deed with a little restaurant here and there. I tend to get along with the managers of the restaurants and the young operators, and because we are talking about the same language, is they want to serve people, or they want to do good food. I love good food. I enjoy, the fact that people are having a great time in my restaurant. So it's very easy to work with them. People in the hospitality industry are fantastic. I love the industry. They call you at all times. They don't have a phone because they call you all the time. So I don't have a bloody phone, But that's one thing that I love too.
But my listeners who don't agree with me, I think luck is a skill, will be some of them don't agree with this. Will say that you were lucky because you worked hard and you created a reputation, and you'd worked on a restaurant that was successful. So you created your own luck. That's my view. But other people will say, well, it's just random. Like you say, someone just decided to give your name to someone else, and that lucky moment led them to call you, which led to you getting that job, which led you to get top 100, which led you to have one of the most successful design firms in Hong Kong. Right. So where do you stand on luck? Do you think it's random or a skill?
I think it's both. I think occasionally you might get a Mark 6, but that would be a 1 in a million. I think most of the time, you work on your luck. First of all, you have to, when it's in front of you, you have to know, and you have to grab it. It might walk right past, and you might not notice. But like you said, I work hard. I won't log hours. And I enjoy what I'm doing. So I work with the people that will get me the next job, and most of the jobs that I get is because someone that I met in a restaurant that I've done, so I think you work your luck, but unless you get those very odd chances, in which you just run into, I don't know what, an amazing site. When we opened our first restaurant, that was again, 2005. I opened it. I've been wanting to open a restaurant by now. I've designed by that time, 200 restaurants, and you find out that 50% of your clients don't even know what they are doing, and they are succeeding in it. And financially, they're a hell of a lot better off than I was. I got a great office, but as a business, it's a very lousy business. I'm sure I can do a lot of other things with the amount of time I spent in here that are more profitable. But I love doing it, so it doesn't really matter. But I wanted to have a bit of security, and with this office, I was never going to be able to retire. So I decided, okay, we need to open a restaurant. I know about restaurants. I know that 50% or more of my clients don't have a clue what they're doing, and within 3 years they are very comfortable. So I met along the way many managers, and so I started to try to convince one to jump boat. He was basically happy working under one company, and eventually I convinced him. But it took 9 months. We for 9 months we were going to presentations, doing the layouts, doing the business plan, talking to landlords. We had people with finance. We didn't have money to open the restaurant, but we had the manager, and I had the design. We had the package. We want to open a steakhouse. And we kept losing the sites. We went to one meeting, one site, another one, and the clients would receive us very well and said, "Oh, that's fantastic. Send us the document, send us the name, send us the feasibility study," and then no calls back. And then within a few weeks, someone was going in there with a similar plan and was like, "Okay." So we had quite a few sites like that, and then we had another strike of luck. We had a site in Wyndham Street, corner of D'Aguilar and Wyndham, Onfen building. And it used to be a hairdresser salon there that had not paid rent for 7 months. The operator of the building, the manager of the building, was panicking because he had to go back to China to report to the Chinese owners. And they had a premise that had been not paying rent for 7 months, basically. So they came to us and said, "Look, I got this site." We went to it, had a meeting with the landlord, and it was like, "Okay, you can have it, but you need to put 240,000 Hong Kong deposit first, like now." And we didn't have it. We had an investor, so I called the investor, but the investor said, you talk about this 9 months ago. I don't have the money anymore." And he was like, "But it was a fantastic site." And so we said, "Okay." And so I came back to the office, and I had 350,000 Hong Kong in the office. So I talked to my staff. I said, "Guys, I need this money for this. Do you mind if I pay you a month later?" And all my staff said, "No problem, boss. Take the money."
Wow. That's amazing.
Yep. So I managed to get money back and pay them back 2 weeks after that. But basically put $240,000. And then the landlord said, "Okay, you got 2 weeks to put 1 million." And it was like, "Okay, where do we get 1 million?" So I did what I hate doing. I just got on the phone and started calling people I know and friends, all the ones that tell you, "Oh, if you have an opportunity, if there's a restaurant, let us know and we'll invest." I mean, they ran like I had COVID-19. I just called them, and one call, talk about that. "Okay, we'll discuss." Call again, nothing. Call again, nothing. It was, and then one of my clients that I called and said, "Look, would you be interested in a partnership to do that?" He came to the office with a check, $1 million Hong Kong dollars, and said, "Hernán, we don't want to be partners. We don't want to be involved in that. We have our own company and we're okay with that. But here is the money. Give it back when you can.
Wow.
So...
Well, that just goes to show the reputation you had built up, though. You learned that moment.
That was a very touching minute, and no contract, nothing,
just like a marriage.
Yep. So
you trust or you don't.
Yep. And that's it. So we put that million, and now we have to start looking for the rest. We needed 6.5 million to open the bloody restaurant. So my business partner, who was going to be the manager, he I don't know what he did, but he managed to get another 1 million. Then we had to start looking for the big investor. And out of the blue, we had, again, this landlord that had done a restaurant in her building years back as a landlord. And we got to a very rocky start, but we ended up getting along very well. She was an amazing lady with a very tough reputation, but she was actually very good. So I went to her, and she found out to one of her staff that I basically had put everything I had in there, and my partner too, and we had this site. And she called me at 9:00 at night. She called home, and my daughter said, sort of call me, and I call her back. And so I explained to her what we were doing, and she said, okay, can we meet there? That was, I was telling you about our investor. Basically, I had to make a few calls, and then I called the secretary of this lady, because she had his secretary had at one point say, if you have any opportunities, let us know. So I explained whatever it is to him, and then he explained that to the landlady. And she called my daughter. My daughter called us. We were at the Thai restaurant at the time, and so she says, I'll meet you there at 11:00 tonight. And, again, she's coming from Clearwater Bay. She has definitely no interest in this. She's, a big landlord, big. And so she comes, have a look at the building. We explain the project to her, between me and my business partner. She takes us to Key Club so we can explain it to her again.
Key Club, for anyone who doesn't know, is a kind of members club, very high profile. And so this high profile landlord takes you to the Key Club. You sit down and you have a discussion about your new restaurant.
That's it. So we go through the whole thing, and then we explain how much money we need. We're missing 4 million basically, and we're trying to sell 49%. We want control. And then 1:00 in the morning, she finishes the meeting and says, okay, I'll give you a call tomorrow. And that was it. I take my ferry home. Colin goes to whatever he lived at the time. And next morning, 9:30, she called. I said, okay, I had a look at your project, and I'm in, but I want 51%. So I called my partner, and said, by that time, he's like, whatever, okay. So we got in there, and but again, we had started construction. We had no money, but again, I called the contractors, the kitchen people, and I told them, we have this project. I have no money. I'm going to get the money. Can you start? They all started. They all worked for 3 weeks. 3 weeks with no money.
You've done the groundwork. You've done the groundwork with the reputation and hard work and sincerity. So it's amazing. Yeah. For anyone that knows Hong Kong, this story is amazing because contractors do not start until you've given them hefty deposits. Right. Yep. And you're talking about, just a context of the money at the time, it was 12 to the, you're talking, $800,000 we're talking about to open up one restaurant. So it's also not small money we're talking about here.
No, it was, we were putting everything in line there, and it opened on September, and we were there on the Friday before opening, sitting by the window with my business partner and my wife, thinking, okay, on Tuesday we opened, basically all done, and it was again very, very successful. And every other restaurant.
What's the name of the restaurant?
Woolloomooloo.
Wow, it was very successful. Yeah, very successful. Yeah, you went on to open up kind of a few of them, right?
We open 7 of them. I mean, 5 Bulumulus and 2 Chop House, which is the cheaper version.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, honestly, I could talk to you all day long. These podcasts are meant to be much shorter than this, but your story is fascinating. I want to, first of all, say thank you for sharing it. I want to ask you more questions and I want to go deeper, but I think maybe I'll have you back on another time if you don't mind. I'd love to dig into your story more. I think your insights are so useful for entrepreneurs, but I'm just conscious that I've already had you for over an hour, and I promised it wouldn't be much longer. So I'll just finish off if it's okay. I've got a few questions for you just at the end. So just if you went back to your younger self, the kind of young, shy Hernán, what advice would you give yourself?
Afraid of falling. Don't be not afraid of don't be embarrassed of falling. I mean, almost do it in purpose. Pretend you're falling. So you realize that most people don't even notice. You're so, I don't know if it's a thing of being shy. I wasn't narcissistic, but you feel like everyone is looking at you all the time. And
most people aren't even looking. I love that. Most people aren't even looking. That's so true. I think that's a better line than fail fast. And that's kind of like, fail. It doesn't matter. No one's looking. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute privilege for me to interview you, and I hope my audience have got as much from it as I have. I've always respected you and loved what you've done. Big fan of your restaurant group, big fan of your designs, and a big fan of your philosophy. So thank you so much for giving time and for sharing your story with me and the audience today.
Honestly, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Good Luck Club podcast. We know you have thousands of podcasts you could be listening to, and you've chosen us. We, of course, feel lucky. If you want to hear more, please go to thegoodluckpod.com or go to any of our social media pages and share with us your views, your insights, and any way that we can improve what we're doing to make it a better experience for you. We wish you the best of luck.